right, guys. Let's do some fan questions.
What's up, Uncle Chael? Big fan from Brazil here. There is a discussion that I always have with my friends. How many guys with no training are needed to knock out a UFC fighter?
Oh, how many? Well, I tell you better bring a few of them. Now, we've seen that go array, and I have to tell you, the MMA fighter does not have an ability to take a punch any better than the random guy off the street that's throwing it, or you who are listening to this. But the MMA guy does have trained eyes. He will know how to roll with it. He will know how to bob. He will know how to weave. He will keep his eyes open. Once he blocks it, he's going to return fire. That's where the real problems come. And the reason I bring that up, if a guy could get to his chin, it's going to be trouble. I mean, look, we just saw a video surface of BJ Penn getting cleaned up in a street fight, taking on one of those random guys you were talking about. But what was BJ Penn doing? He was showing the guy no level of respect as to his fighting abilities, going, look, I'm trained and you aren't. He kept his hands down. He was trying to roll with punches, and in the process ends up eating a few and falls asleep. I mean, there's a reality there, and it's not to tease BJ. There's a reality there that if you were a trained fighter and you find yourself in a fight, use your training.
Hey Chael, Matt here. Quick question. In your previous video, you'd said that Khabib probably can't be considered one of the greatest of all time just because we're in the champ era. Okay, great. Let me offer you this. How is Jon Jones considered one of the greatest of all time and has been for a while now? Multiple of his title defenses have been split decisions. He's been accused of steroids multiple times. He's got a no contest with Daniel Cormier. He's got a loss on his record. He's a single champ. But oh, by the way, so is Khabib. And Khabib's only lost one single round to Conor McGregor. Explain that to me, please.
Okay, so you make a compelling argument. I don't disagree with any of your points, but when we're talking about somebody who's going to be remembered as the greatest fighter of all time, that just comes down to paper. Now, look, you laid out a great case on Khabib being undefeated and a champion and only having lost one round and taking down meaningful opponents. All of those things are true, but one thing we know about history, let's say Khabib leaves the sport today, 10 years from now we're having the conversation. Nobody remembers that. Nobody remembers where those fights were. They built a arena for Khabib. Nobody remembers the stresses or the pressures he was under. Nobody remembers who those opponents were. It just doesn't work that way. You're just left with argument of paper. Much like the Michael Jordan versus LeBron argument before LeBron had any rings. And people were happy to say, well, Jordan's got 6, LeBron's at none. Or now LeBron's got a couple. Well, Jordan still got more than LeBron's got. Right? It's one of those things where paper and resumes end up coming into that for the argument. The second part of your question where you were arguing Khabib against Jon, and I would like to say for you, I'm not stating that I don't believe that Khabib is this great and wonderful fighter. He is all of those things. I was stating for you how he might be remembered when you're living in this champ era, and you got a couple of guys, a couple of athletes, Amanda Nunes being one, Henry Cejudo being another, George St. Pierre possibly being another, who are talking about a champ. I mean, that's incredible paper. That's incredible resumes. That's a tremendous problem to argue around. How you could ever argue successfully without seeing a fight, just argue that Henry Cejudo is not the greatest combat athlete of all time when he's covered 3 different weight classes already through 2 different sports. But that's a hard argument. And I do think that Khabib has his seat at the table. And I don't want to take that from him. I'm just suggesting for you that it might be hard if this champ thing continues, and if somebody goes a champ, it just gets a little harder. When you bring up Jon Jones, why is Jon given a pass on that without becoming the champ? I will just tell you my own opinion on that, which is Jon is a perfect light heavyweight. On the juice or off the juice, either way, Jon's within 15 pounds of his weight class. That's a very normal amount of weight to diet and exercise and ultimately pull off. That's just a very reasonable. He can't then go down to middleweight. He's too big. And to argue, if he chooses to argue that he thinks he's too small for heavyweight, I personally think he'd do just fine at heavyweight. But if he doesn't, to tell him that, hey, Jon, you weigh 218, you weigh 220, you're going to now go fight at 265. I don't think that's reasonable either. That has to be a choice that he comes to on his own. I think it's one of the reasons that Jon is often given a pass on that. He just happens to be a guy that's at the perfect weight class. The same is said for all heavyweights. Nobody's ever saying, hey, Stipe, good job, but we're all going to forget about you unless you get down to 205 and become champ, right? All the heavyweights. Hey, Francis, you better get down to 205. All the heavyweights are also given a pass just because it's such a huge gap to the next weight. That would be what I would offer for you.
Hey, Chael. My question is about Justin Gaethje in the lightweight division. Khabib is rumored to face Tony Ferguson, and Conor is rumored to face Donald Cerrone. Poirier is out with an injury, so where does that leave Justin Gaethje? Does he wait for an opponent? I believe if McGregor beats Cerrone, he'll be the next in line for a title shot. So I believe Justin Gaethje has to fight. Does he go for the BMF belt? What does he do?
Well, don't forget, you got two other killers at 155 pounds, and while the math that you just laid out is all correct, you are leaving out Paul Felder, and you also left out Dan Hooker. And if you're telling me that you wouldn't love to see a Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje fight, I'm going to then tell you that's only because you hadn't thought of it yet. If you told me you didn't want to see Paul Felder in there with Justin Gaethje, then I'm going to tell you, well, that's only because you haven't thought of it yet. I think that's your three-way right there, and I think you get that figured out. Does that mean that, what if Gaethje ends up the odd man out, though, as you're figuring that, and all of a sudden it's Hooker versus Felder? Okay, great. The fans all win, but now we're still left to answer the question of what do you do with Gaethje? It seems to me that Kevin Lee is now coming off of something very special, where he's turned things around. I would love to see Gaethje versus Al Iaquinta, but Al coming off the lot, we might not get there. We have musical chairs being played at that weight class. Don't forget that's the toughest weight class in the sport. That's the toughest weight class the sport has ever seen. So if you're only looking for a winner versus a winner or an undefeated guy, stop. That's not what 155 is. 155 is a mess. 155 is going to stay a mess because you have iron on iron.
What's up, bad guy? I was just watching some old UFC interviews, and I watched one with you, Jon Jones, and Joe Rogan. And just seeing Joe Rogan in between you two killers up there made me wonder. I know Dana White has previously said, you know, how great of a boxer he is, and that he could beat Tito Ortiz in a boxing match. So I'm wondering who will win in an MMA rules fight between Joe Rogan and Dana White. And then also, I'm wondering if you've seen Dana White box, and if so, do you think you could beat Dana White in a boxing match? Thanks, man.
Well, I got to tell you, so when Dana was talking about he could beat Tito in a boxing match, Tito actually also admitted they used to spar together on a regular basis, and Dana would touch him up in boxing. So it wasn't that crazy of a claim. And as far as Joe Rogan grew up doing Taekwondo. He then got into jiu-jitsu, and I am quite sure made it all the way to a black belt. Also, if you look at Joe Rogan, I mean, he just looks like a guy that wants to exercise. Now, if you're asking me who would win between a commentator, Joe Rogan, and the boss, Dana White, I will tell you this. Kumala, the Ugandan giant, is more likely to win the Olympic gold medal in pole vaulting before Joe Rogan wants to get in the boss's wheelhouse.
What's up, Uncle Chael? So, because of Conor, his antics the past year, he lost a significant amount of fans. This question has two parts. Is Conor still the biggest draw in the UFC today? And part two, when Conor fights Cowboy in January, will that card still do the same numbers as Conor cards have done in the past? What are your thoughts on this?
You know, and I'll tell you, I've heard that a few different places. People have even come up to me privately on the streets. I met a few Irish fans just over the last week in New York, and that's what they said to me. They said, hey, we're not supporting Conor like we used to. Things are now different. What do you think he's going to do? Let me just tell you how it feels back in Ireland. We don't have this guy's back the way we used to have. This was said to me a number of times. Now, I do have to then turn the gun back on you and go, okay, what does that mean? Being super fired up and wearing a Conor t-shirt and, you know, watching a bunch of Conor interviews on the day of a Conor fight before you sit down to buy it, you're not going to do that anymore. You're not going to wear the t-shirt. We're not going to all call our friends and, hey, did you hear the great funny thing Conor said like we used to do? But, yeah, sure, I'm going to watch the fight. Okay, well, at the end of the day, that's the only piece of that puzzle that matters. So when people go, well, we don't support him like he used to. Okay, are you going to watch his next fight? Yes or no? Well, yeah, we'll watch the fight. Okay. That's all the support he needs. I mean, in fairness, that's all the support he needs. And I don't really see that. Look, Conor has a lot of fans, but Conor had a lot of people tuning in to watch him lose. One of the reasons the Khabib fight did so well, it was this one contest that Conor's finally found himself in where people are all but certain he's coming in second, and they were excited to see it. Okay, great. I mean, that's just as good for business. People love you or people hate you. If people don't care about you, that's where you can't do business. I think Conor's still in a good spot. I really do.
Hey, Chael Sonnen. It's the Roach here from Yelm, Washington. Question for you. I always hear everybody, including yourself, the smartest man in the room, say Jon Jones doesn't have an opponent. Well, you know what? What are we doing here? Are we in an ass-kicking contest? Are we having some sort of a San Francisco standoff? Find him an opponent.
100% agree. I feel like you were scolding me there. Are you under the false impression that somehow I'm on the opposite side of that argument? Because I'm not. I like what you're saying. Now, when it comes to Jon Jones and when it comes to competing, you and I, man, we could work together. I'm there. Jon Jones's contract is a little bit different, just to get into the weeds of this with you. Because he is a champion, he has a new championship clause and different levels of participation. He also has a different onus that is put on his shoulders if he is the marquee fighter representing the A side. Jon Jones's last two fights, he was in an arena where people were dressed up as empty seats. For the sitting champion of the world in the perennial division, the light heavyweight division, Tito was there, and Chuck was there, and Randy Couture was there, Rampage was there, and now Jon is there. I mean, through the history of the sport, Frank Shamrock was there. Through the history of the organization, this has been a leading division, and for Jon Jones to not be able to sell out arenas isn't great. So there is a school of thought. We go, okay, hold on. When we say he doesn't have an opponent, and you say find him one, there is a part of this where, hey, if we're going to bring this to the table and we've got to honor our contract with Jon and incentivize him the right way, we need the right opponent. We got to build a guy. We got to find a guy, to use your term. But it appears that problem is solved. It does appear that Dominic Reyes has emerged. He's got main event experience. He was on the worldwide leader ESPN while beating the former world champion Chris Weidman. I think that Dominic's time is here. I think this problem is solved. As far as your attitude and the way you're looking at things go, good for you, man. That's what this is about.
Hey, Uncle Chael. It's a logistical nightmare, but could you talk a bit, both in terms of excitement and stylistically, what you think of the idea Rumble versus Jones for the vacant heavyweight title? Your thoughts?
Rumble versus Jones for the vacant heavyweight title. Now, I'm assuming that you spoke correctly, so I'm going to answer it to the words that you said, the vacant heavyweight title. So what you were suggesting, if I have you right, is that Daniel Cormier fights Stipe, Daniel beats him, Daniel leaves the sport, as he said he's going to do, and therefore, the heavyweight title becomes vacant. You then are looking for two guys to come in. You're removing Stipe from the equation under the argument that he just had an opportunity. So you bring in Rumble versus Jon Jones. Logistically, yes, you've got a bit of a problem there, but let's just play along. How could we make that happen? Look, I think anytime Jon Jones wants to move up to heavyweight and say, I have arrived, he goes right into a world title shot. He has offered a little bit of dialogue that, no, I would move up to become a contender. In fact, I'd fight Francis, and the winner can go and fight for the belt. I don't take him at his word. I don't think he was sincere. I think if he was, he would now have a contract to fight Francis. I think he was looking for attention because he's an addict and that's what he does. But if he did want to move to heavyweight, I think he deserves to go fight for the belt. So if there was a vacant title, okay, I can drink to that and I can see how we could get Jon there. And to answer your question on the logistics, how do we get Rumble there? Well, first off, get him cleared, get him back in the UFC. I know he says that's what he's going to do, but now I haven't heard a lot of dialogue on that, right? There'll be something where he'll need a contract and he'll need a weight class and he'll have to go through the USADA testing pool, which all may well be underway, and I just simply haven't heard about it. You go get him a win, one win. And, he's another guy that said he would fight Francis Ngannou. Francis is a top contender. That's why I bring Francis up. But he doesn't appear to be a bit of a common denominator in this dialogue that Jon's talked about him and Rumble's talked about him. Let's say Rumble came in and got the jump on somebody like Francis. Then I think you could package him up and put him in that spot.
So last week I asked you about Till versus Gastelum. And to quote your words, you said we'd be seeing a much more healthy and hydrated, nutritionally balanced Till? Well, the fight took place and we all saw what happened. In my opinion, Till looked much healthier, much more full of energy out there. And even though it might not have been the most convincing win in the world, I think we could all agree that Till was able to edge it out versus some very tough competition. Okay, great. So here's my question, Chael. Do you think that more fighters should be weighing in to fight at their appropriate weight classes rather than be doing what Till used to do at 170, which was, starving themselves, being dehydrated during training camp, and just stressing in general to cut massive amounts of weight and beat the scales coming into a fight? Because I think if there's anything we could learn from Till's big victory here, is that he should have came in at 185 a long time ago.
Okay. I don't know that I would disagree with you. Till had a couple of things that were different. First off, the weight class. But Till had a totally different attitude. He, quite frankly, was nice. Till did not have edge to him. Till was polite. Till was humble. I mean, there was things that were greatly different in Till's approach and then going out and getting that outcome that I think he's going to take with him. I really think that he will. I think that we saw a young, immature Till throughout 2018. And I think as we're approaching 2020, we've now got a man. I think we watched a boy become a man. And being around him, I was so impressed at the change in his demeanor. And I don't need that. I don't need sportsmanship. I want to be entertained. I don't give a damn if he wants to be nice or he doesn't want to be. I'm just sharing with you he was. Including off camera. He was very polite. And he was very humble prior to the fight and even in victory. It was a totally different Darren Till. One thing about that contest, to remind you, a lot of people were unhappy with it. You called it fairly unconvincing, and that's fair. It was very tight. It even went to a split decision. One judge gave all 3 rounds to Kelvin. I mean, it was pretty unconvincing. I agree with you there, but some other people came away thinking it was boring or a hard sparring session. I saw something totally different. I saw a very tactical fight by Till, who frustrated Gastelum, who came out and showed Kelvin something he'd never seen. Use it from my perspective, okay? I've watched all of Kelvin's fights. I also watched all of Till's fights. Till was implementing a style, particularly the clinch, particularly control of an underhook, that he has never done in a mixed martial arts contest before. How could Kelvin be anything but surprised when it was happening? How could he be anything but confused? What are we doing here? And why are you I'm the wrestler. Why are you forcing this position, Mr. Kickboxer? Get back and start with the kick into the boxing. Threw him off. Wash and repeat. 15 minutes later, you got to turn to those judges. That was a lot better fight than people wanted to give it credit for, and I think the only reason it didn't get recognized as that is we were spoiled with the card. We had the best card that was presented all of 2019. We're having knockout after knockout finishes. We got anticipation. Oh, by the way, Diaz is up next. He's going to be coming out with George, and The Rock is on his way out. I just think there was so much on that night that, as good as that fight was, if you judge it on a curve, maybe it didn't look so good. If it's a straight up test, that fight was an A.
On the feet or on the ground, undefeated, never lost a round. Biggest arms in the city of Westland, undisputed, GOAT king of wrestling. Tito tapped, Fado quit. Jon Jones broke a toe and had to sit. Anderson got mauled and bashed, and the bad guy made off with a bag of cash. Oh, and by the way, let me offer this. Chael knows just how good Conor McGregor is, and he knows into all is where Kevin Lee fits, but he'll never reveal the secrets to business. Uncle Chael, Uncle Chael, Uncle Chael, Iranami, Uncle Chael, Uncle Chael, Uncle Chael, the bad